Hello, my beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. And if we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes designed to inspire your spirit. And you can learn more on my website, illuminatingsouls.com. You can also visit me on my Facebook page of the same name, where I post inspiring messages every day for you. So lots of ways that we can connect. But for now, the angels and I are here to help you rest and hopefully fall asleep. So as I record this, it is an overcast morning here, and I'm feeling like I just want to cozy up, which is perfect for recording this episode. I am here underneath the blanket fort. I am feeling the love of the angels flowing through for you, and it is truly a great joy to get to share their presence and their love with you. So if you're new to the world of angels, they are divine celestial beings that are the embodiment of unconditional love. And we all have them. We all have a loving support team that is unseen, that has been with us since before we were born. And as we learn to open to this awareness, it becomes easier to access their love, their inspiration. I will say that as I record this, the energy feels a bit wobbly. You may wonder what that means. I experience energetic wobbles through my emotional heart. Typically, I feel a shift of my emotions that is really not associated with any of my personal curriculum in life. And one of the ways I can discern, is this mine or not, is I ask that question. I look at the energy, I feel into it, and I ask, does this belong to me? Is this mine? If it's mine, typically I will have a sense of what the wobbliness is about. But more often than not, I can tell that it is not mine. And so what does that mean when we feel collective energies? Well, most of us didn't grow up understanding that we are influenced by the collective energies or frequencies that we are navigating. Maybe as we went through life, we thought about the phases of the moon, but it's much more than that. I think of it like energetic weather. When the skies are gray, it can impact how we feel about our day. And I think the collective energies are a bit like that. So if you're feeling a little wobbly, or you're feeling like you just want to curl up and have some quiet time to yourself, that's actually perfect for bedtime. But in general, if that is the way you're feeling, you are in very good company. So I invite you to get comfortable and cozy and snuggle on up in whatever way best serves you. We're going to have the angels come in and do a clearing and balancing process for you and for me too, as we all gather together here. So take a nice deep breath in and allow your body to relax. You have done enough for today. And you have permission to rest. Resting is a really sacred time. I think so often in life we think that we have to be busy in order to be productive and to move things forward. But I don't know about you, but some of the biggest shifts that I have internally happen in the quiet. That there is something that is so sacred about when we allow our bodies and consciousness to rest. It's like there's space and balance can be restored. And from that place, clarity often flows through as well. So I invite you to take another breath in, making space, body, mind, and spirit for you to connect with the divine love, comfort, and support that is here for you. And I'm going to call in the angels, even though they are already here. I love the ritual of calling them in. So beautiful angels on high, I invite you to join us here. And I ask that you clear from us anything that does not belong to us. Anything that is no longer serving our highest and best good. And angels, I ask that you bring blessings of love and healing and light to each of our beloveds hearing this message. And dear ones, just take a nice deep breath in. I feel the angels with us now. And I'm going to bring forward a message from them for you. They say, even in the stillness, there is movement happening. Just because you do not feel as if you know your answers, it does not mean that the wisdom is not already flowing to you and through you. They say your path is blessed. And right now, your rest is important because you are preparing to blossom open into new waves of light and inspiration that are going to be bringing you much joy and positive momentum. This is why you are being guided to rest more than usual, because you require time to recalibrate. Right now, your energy field is being tended to. Your team of angels is taking good care of you. And so we invite you to take a deep breath in, allowing waves of relaxation and light to flow over you. And imagine, if you will, that the room that you are in is being filled with a soft pink light. This light is representative of the divine love that is being sent to you, calibrated just for you. So just breathe it in. Allow yourself to receive. Allow calming and soothing energies to flow to you now. You, dear one, you are a blessing here on earth. Your prayers and your intentions, they have been received by the divine heart of God. And things are in motion for you. We affirm that brighter days are ahead. So again, allowing the calming and soothing light of God to flow to you now, to help cultivate a sweet and sacred space for you to drift off into a good expanse of sleep. And just breathe with us right now. So much love is pouring through for you. There's nothing you need to do right now, nothing you have to figure out. And I also feel tremendous joy flowing through for you. Just breathe it in, allowing the angels to help to lift your energy field. I always contemplate this as lifting my feet up off the earth for a little while, coming into the higher realms where it is easier to connect with source energy and remember who I am. So right now, the angels are helping you remember who you are as a divine child of God. You are filled with magic and light. You are a miracle from on high. You are precious in all this world. So you allow yourself to rest. And while you do, I'm going to read you a story. So tonight, I'm guided to come back to Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. As I was preparing to record this episode and contemplating about what our story would be, I just was craving the opportunity to come back to reading this book for you. I love the language that Lucy Maud Montgomery uses. And I will say in general, I have a newfound appreciation for the spoken word. I've always loved reading, and I still love reading silently to myself, but I'm realizing what a different experience it is, whether I'm listening to audiobooks or reading for you, that when books are read aloud, we hear every word, like every word matters. Whereas when I'm reading to myself, I synthesize very quickly, and sometimes the language gets lost. Just yesterday, I was having this experience. I have some dear friends who have been recommending the book Walking in Wonder by John O'Donohue. And I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I would have pronounced it John O'Donohue. That's an American way of saying his name, but in the audiobook, they refer to him as John O'Donohue. So I'm not quite sure. So I'm going with John O'Donohue in alignment with how the narrators of the book share his name. And I've read bits and pieces of the book before, and it's lovely. But yesterday I was feeling kind of restless, and I decided to go on a walk around my neighborhood, and I put in my ear pods and started listening to the audiobook of Walking in Wonder, and the language is so beautiful and the concept so powerful, and I found myself gasping and saying out loud, yes, to different concepts that were being shared. And I didn't necessarily have the same experience when I was reading it for myself. There's something powerful about hearing words aloud. So, just as an aside, if you are looking for a lovely, inspiring book, especially an audiobook, I highly recommend Walking in Wonder by John O'Donohue, or Don O'Donohue. I got mine out of my library through the e-library, which is a lovely way to borrow books. And so with that in my heart, I'm going to bring us back to Anne of Green Gables. I'm not sure what chapter we're on just yet, but when we left off, in Avonlea, they have a new minister and his wife who have come to tend to the community. And Marilla is talking to Anne that she is going to invite them over for tea. And Anne has asked if she can make the cake. And of course, we already know, Anne being Anne, there's going to be some sort of confusion, difficulty around this. But we don't yet know what it is. So here's where we're going to pick up. So you just enjoy. And I'm going to read to you for a while. I suppose we must have Mr. and Mrs. Allen up to tea some day soon, said Marilla reflectively. They've been most everywhere but here. Let me see. Next Wednesday would be a good time to have them, but don't say a word to Matthew about it, for if he knew they were coming, he'd find some excuse to be away that day. He'd gotten so used to Mr. Bentley he didn't mind him, but he's going to find it hard to get acquainted with a new minister, and a new minister's wife will frighten him to death. I'll be as secret as the dead, assured Anne. But oh, Marilla, will you let me make a cake for the occasion? I'd love to do something for Mrs. Allen, and you know I can make a pretty good cake by this time. You can make a layer cake, promised Marilla. Monday and Tuesday great preparations went on at Green Gables. Having the minister and his wife to tea was a serious and important undertaking, and Marilla was determined not to be eclipsed by any of the Avonlea housekeepers. Anne was wild with excitement and delight. She talked it all over with Diana Tuesday night in the twilight as they sat on the big red stones by the Dryad's bubble and made rainbows in the water with little twigs dipped in fir balsam. Everything is ready, Diana, except my cake, which I'm to make in the morning, and the baking powder biscuits which Marilla will make just before tea time. I assure you, Diana, that Marilla and I have had a busy 2 days of it. It is such a responsibility having a minister's family to tea. I never went through an experience before. You should just see our pantry. It is a sight to behold. We're going to have jellied chicken and cold tongue. We're to have 2 kinds of jelly, red and yellow, and whipped cream and lemon pie, and cherry pie, and 3 kinds of cookies, and fruit cake, and Marilla's famous yellow plum preserves that she keeps especially for ministers, and pound cake and layer cake, and biscuits as aforesaid, and new bread as old both in case the minister is dyspeptic and can't eat new. Mrs. Lynde says ministers are dyspeptic, but I don't think Mr. Allen has been a minister long enough for it to have had a bad effect on him. I just grow cold when I think of my layer cake. Oh, Diana, what if it shouldn't be good? I dreamed last night that I was chased all around by a fearful goblin with a big layer cake for a head. It'll be good, all right, assured Diana, who was a very comfortable sort of friend. I'm sure that piece of the one you made that we had for lunch in Idlewild 2 weeks ago was perfectly elegant. Yes, but cakes have such a terrible habit of turning out bad just when you especially want them to be good, sighed Anne, setting a particularly well-balsamed twig afloat. However, I suppose I shall just have to trust Providence and be careful to put in the flour. Oh, look, Diana, what a lovely rainbow. Do you suppose the Dryad will come out after we go away and take it for a scarf? You know there is no such thing as a Dryad, said Diana. Diana's mother had found out about the haunted wood and had been decidedly angry over it. As a result, Diana had abstained from any further imitative flights of imagination and did not think it prudent to cultivate a spirit of belief even in harmless dryads. But it's so easy to imagine there is, said Anne. Every night before I go to bed, I look out of my window and I wonder if the dryad is really sitting there, combing her locks with the spring for a mirror. Sometimes I look for her footprints in the dew in the morning. Oh, Diana, don't give up your faith in the dryad. And I have to say, this is one of the things I love so much about Anne is her imagination and her big spirit. And I don't know, I just love that. Okay, we'll go on. So Wednesday morning came and Anne got up at sunrise because she was too excited to sleep. She had caught a severe cold in the head by reason of her dabbling in the spring and the preceding evening, but nothing short of absolute pneumonia could have quenched her interest in culinary matters that morning. After breakfast, she proceeded to make her cake. When she finally shut the oven door upon it, she drew a long breath. "I'm sure I haven't forgotten anything this time, Marilla. But do you think it will rise? Just suppose, perhaps the baking powder isn't good. I used it out of the new can, and Mrs. Lynde said you never can be sure of getting good baking powder nowadays when everything is so adulterated. Mrs. Lynde said the government ought to take the matter up, but she says we'll never see the day when a Tory government will do it, Marilla. What if the cake doesn't rise?" "We'll have plenty without it," was Marilla's unimpassioned way of looking at the subject. The cake did rise, however, and came out of the oven as light and feathery as golden foam. Anne flushed with delight, clapped it together with layers of ruby jello, and, in imagination, saw Mrs. Allen eating it and possibly asking for another piece. "You'll be using the best tea set, of course, Marilla," she said. "Can I fix the table with ferns and wild roses?" "I think that's all nonsense," sniffed Marilla. "In my opinion, it's the edibles that matter and not the flummery decorations." "Well, Mrs. Barry had her table decorated," said Anne, who was not entirely guiltless of the wisdom of the serpent, "and the minister paid her an elegant compliment. He said it was a feast for the eye as well as the palate." "Well, do as you like," said Marilla, who was quite determined not to be surpassed by Mrs. Barry or anybody else. "Only mind you to leave enough room for the dishes and the food." Anne laid herself out to decorate in a manner and after a fashion that should leave Mrs. Barry's nowhere. Having abundance of roses and ferns and a very artistic taste of her own, she made that tea table such a thing of beauty that when the minister and his wife sat down to it, they exclaimed in chorus over its loveliness. "It's Anne's doing," said Marilla grimly, and Anne felt that Mrs. Allen's approving smile was almost too much happiness for this world. Matthew was there, having been inveigled into the party only goodness and Anne knew how. He had been in such a state of shyness and nervousness that Marilla had given him up in despair. But Anne took him in hand so successfully that he now sat at the table in his best clothes and white collar and talked to the minister not uninterestingly. He never said a word to Mrs. Allen, but that perhaps was not to be expected. All went merry as a marriage bell until Anne's layer cake was passed. Mrs. Allen, having already been helped to a bewildering variety, declined it. But Marilla, seeing the disappointment on Anne's face, said smilingly, "Oh, you must take a piece of this, Mrs. Allen. Anne made it on purpose for you." "Well, in that case, I must sample it," laughed Mrs. Allen, helping herself to a plump triangle, as did the minister and Marilla. Mrs. Allen took a mouthful of hers and a most peculiar expression crossed her face. Not a word did she say, however, but steadily ate away at it. Marilla saw the expression and hastened to taste the cake. "Anne Shirley," she exclaimed, "what on earth did you put into that cake?" "Nothing but what the recipe said, Marilla," cried Anne with a look of anguish. "Oh, isn't it all right?" "All right? It's simply horrible. Mr. Allen, don't try to eat it, and taste it yourself. What flavoring did you use? Vanilla, said Anne, her face scarlet with mortification after tasting the cake. Only vanilla. Oh, Marilla, it must have been the baking powder. I had my suspicions of that baking powder fiddlesticks. Go and bring me the bottle of vanilla you used. Anne fled to the pantry and returned with a small bottle partially filled with a brown liquid and labeled yellowly, Best Vanilla. Marilla took it, uncorked it, smelled it. Mercy on us, Anne, you flavored that cake with anodyne liniment. I broke the liniment bottle last week and poured what was left into an old empty vanilla bottle. I suppose it's partly my fault. I should have warned you. But for pity's sake, why couldn't you have smelled it? Anne dissolved into tears under this double disgrace. I couldn't. I had such a cold. And with this she fairly fled to the gable chamber, where she cast herself on the bed and wept as one who refuses to be comforted. Presently a light step sounded on the stairs and somebody entered the room. Oh, Marilla, sobbed Anne without looking up. I'm disgraced forever. I shall never be able to live this down. It will get out. Things always do get out in Avonlea. Diana will ask me how my cake turned out, and I shall have to tell her the truth. I shall always be pointed as the girl who flavored a cake with anodyne liniment. The boys in school will never get over laughing at it. Oh, Marilla, if you have a spark of Christian pity, don't tell me that I must go down and wash the dishes after this. I'll wash them when the minister and his wife are gone, but I cannot ever look Mrs. Allen in the face again. Perhaps she'll think I tried to poison her. Mrs. Lynde says she knows an orphan girl who tried to poison her benefactor, but the liniment isn't poisonous. It's meant to be taken internally, although not in cakes. Won't you tell Mrs. Allen so, Marilla? Suppose you jump up and tell her so yourself, said a merry voice. Anne flew up to find Mrs. Allen standing by her bed, surveying her with laughing eyes. My dear little girl, you mustn't cry like this, she said, genuinely disturbed by Anne's tragic face. Why, it's all just a funny mistake that anybody might make. Oh no, it takes me to make such a mistake, said Anne forlornly. And I wanted you to have that cake so nice for you, Mrs. Allen. Yes, I know, dear. And I assure you I appreciate your kindness and thoughtfulness just as much as if it had turned out all right. Now, you mustn't cry any more, but come down with me and show me your flower garden. Miss Cuthbert tells me you have a little plot all your own. I want to see it, for I'm very much interested in flowers. Anne permitted herself to be led down and comforted, reflecting that it was really providential that Mrs. Allen was a kindred spirit. Nothing more was said about the liniment cake, and when the guests went away, Anne found that she had enjoyed the evening more than she could have expected, considering that terrible incident. Nevertheless, she sighed deeply. Marilla, isn't it nice to think that tomorrow is a new day with no mistakes in it yet? I'll warrant you'll make plenty in it, said Marilla. I never saw your beat for making mistakes, Anne. Yes, and well I know it, admitted Anne mournfully. But have you ever noticed one encouraging thing about me, Marilla? I never make the same mistake twice. I don't know as that's much benefit when you're always making new ones. Oh, don't you see, Marilla? There must be a limit to the mistakes one person can make, and when I get to the end of them, then I'll be through with them. That's a comforting thought. Well, you'd better go and give that cake to the pigs, said Marilla. It isn't fit for any human to eat, not even Jerry, who is their farmhand. Okay, so now we're on chapter 22. Anne is invited out to tea. And what are your eyes popping out of your head about now? Asked Marilla when Anne had just come in from a run to the post office. Have you discovered another kindred spirit? Excitement hung around Anne like a garment, shone in her eyes and kindled in every feature. She had come dancing up the lane like a wind-blown sprite through the mellow sunshine and lazy shadows of the August evening. See, isn't that gorgeous writing? I would have missed the beauty of all those words if I was just reading it to myself, but listen to the beauty of this language. Excitement hung around Anne like a garment. It shone in her eyes and kindled in every feature. She had come dancing up the lane like a wind-blown sprite through the mellow sunshine and lazy shadows of the August evening. That's just beautiful. Okay, I'll keep going now. No, Marilla, but oh, what do you think? I'm invited to tea at the manse tomorrow afternoon. Mrs. Allen left the letter for me at the post office. Just look at it, Marilla. Miss Anne Shirley Green Gables. That is the first time I was ever called Miss. Such a thrill as it gave me. I shall cherish it forever among my choicest treasures. Mrs. Allen told me she meant to have all the members of her Sunday school class to tea in turn, said Marilla, regarding the wonderful event very coolly. You needn't get in such a fever over it. Do learn to take things calmly, child. For Anne to take things calmly would have been to change her nature. All spirit and fire and dew as she was, the pleasures and pains of life came to her with trebled intensity. Marilla felt this and was vaguely troubled over it, realizing that the ups and downs of existence would probably bear hardly on this impulsive soul, and not sufficiently understanding that the equally great capacity for delight might more than compensate. Therefore, Marilla conceived it to be her duty to drill Anne into a tranquil uniformity of disposition as impossible and alien to her as to a dancing sunbeam in one of the brook shadows. She did not make much headway, as she sorrowfully admitted to herself. The downfall of some dear hope or plan plunged Anne into deeps of affliction. The fulfillment thereof exalted her to dizzy realms of delight. Marilla had almost begun to despair of ever fashioning this waif of the world into her model little girl of demure manners and prim deportment. Neither would she have believed that she really liked Anne much better as she was. Anne went to bed that night, speechless with misery because Matthew had said the wind was round northeast and he feared it would be a rainy day tomorrow. The rustle of the poplar leaves about the house worried her. It sounded so like pattering raindrops and the full, faraway roar of the Gulf, to which she listened delightedly at other times, loving its strange, sonorous, haunting rhythm, now seemed like a prophecy of the storm and disaster to a small maiden who particularly wanted a fine day, and thought that the morning would never come. But all things have an end, even nights before the day on which you are invited to take tea at the manse. The morning, in spite of Matthew's predictions, was fine, and Anne's spirits soared to their highest. "Oh, Marilla, there is something in me today that makes me just love everybody I see," she exclaimed as she washed the breakfast dishes. "You don't know how good I feel. Wouldn't it be nice if it could last? I believe I could be a model child if I were just invited out to tea every day. But oh, Marilla, it's a solemn occasion too. I feel so anxious. What if I shouldn't behave properly? You know, I never had tea at the manse before, and I'm not sure that I know all of the rules of etiquette, although I've been studying the rules given in the etiquette department of the Family Herald ever since I came here. I'm so afraid I'll do something silly or forget to do something I should do. Would it be good manners to take a second helping of anything you wanted to very much? The trouble with you, Anne, is that you're thinking too much about yourself. You should just think of Mrs. Allen and what would be nicest and most agreeable to her," said Marilla, hitting for once in her life on a very sound and pithy piece of advice. Anne instantly realized this. "You are right, Marilla. I'll try not to think about myself at all." Anne evidently got through her visit without any serious breach of etiquette, for she came home through the twilight under a great high-sprung sky gloried over with trails of saffron and rosy cloud, in a beatified state of mind, and told Marilla all about it happily, sitting on the big red sandstone slab at the kitchen door with her tired curly head in Marilla's gingham lap. A cool wind was blowing down over the long harvested fields from the rims of furry western hills and whistling through the poplars. One clear star hung over the orchard, and the fireflies were flitting over Lover's Lane, in and out among the ferns and rustling boughs. Anne watched them as she talked and somehow felt that wind and stars and fireflies were all tangled up together into something unutterably sweet and enchanting. Oh, Marilla, I had a most fascinating time. I feel that I have not lived in vain, and I shall always feel like that, even if I should never be invited to tea at a manse again. When I got there, Mrs. Allen met me at the door. She was dressed in the sweetest dress of pale pink organdy, with dozens of frills and elbow sleeves, and she looked just like a seraph. I really think I'd like to be a minister's wife when I grow up, Marilla. A minister mightn't mind my red hair because he wouldn't be thinking of such worldly things. But then, of course, one would have to be naturally good, and I'll never be that. So I suppose there's no use in thinking about it. Some people are naturally good, you know, and others are not. I'm one of the others. Mrs. Lynde says I'm full of original sin. No matter how hard I try to be good, I can never make such a success of it as those who are naturally good. It's a good deal like geometry, I expect, but don't you think the trying so hard ought to count for something? Mrs. Allen is one of the naturally good people. I love her passionately. You know, there are some people like Matthew and Mrs. Allen that you can love right off without any trouble. And then there are others like Mrs. Lynde that you have to try very hard to love. You know, you ought to love them because they know so much and are such active workers in the church. But you have to keep reminding yourself of it all the time or else you forget. There was another little girl at the manse to tea from the White Sands Sunday School. Her name was Laurette Bradley, and she was a very nice little girl. Not exactly a kindred spirit, but still very nice. We had an elegant tea, and I think I kept all the rules of etiquette pretty well. After tea, Mrs. Allen played and sang, and she got Loretta and me to sing too. Mrs. Allen says I have a good voice, and she says I must sing in the Sunday school choir after this. You can't think how I was thrilled at the mere thought. I've longed so to sing in the Sunday school choir as Diana does, but I feared it was an honor I could never aspire to. Loretta had to go home early because there is a big concert in the White Sands Hotel tonight, and her sister is to recite at it. Loretta says that the Americans at the hotel give a concert every fortnight in aid of the Charlottetown Hospital, and they ask a lot of the White Sands people to recite. Loretta said she expected to be asked herself someday. I just gazed at her in awe. After she had gone, Mrs. Allen and I had a heart-to-heart talk. I told her everything about Mrs. Thomas and the twins and Katie Maurice and Violetta and coming to Green Gables and my troubles over geometry. And would you believe it, Marilla? Mrs. Allen told me she was a dunce at geometry too. You don't know how that encouraged me. Mrs. Lynde came to the manse just before I left. And what do you think, Marilla? The trustees have hired a new teacher, and it's a lady. Her name is Miss Muriel Stacy. Isn't that a romantic name? Mrs. Lynde said they've never had a female teacher in Avonlea before, and she thinks it's a dangerous innovation. But I think it will be splendid to have a lady teacher, and I really don't see how I'm going to live through the 2 weeks before school begins. I'm so impatient to see her. And now we will read a little bit from chapter 23, Anne Comes to Grief in an Affair of Honor. Anne had to live through more than 2 weeks as it happened, almost a month having elapsed since a liniment cake episode. It was high time for her to get into fresh trouble of some sort. Little mistakes, such as absent-mindedly emptying a pan of skim milk into a basket of yarn balls in the pantry instead of into the pig's bucket, and walking clean over the edge of the log bridge into the brook while wrapped in an imaginative reverie, not really being worth counting. A week after the tea of the manse, Diana Barry gave a party. Small and select, Anne assured Marilla. Just the girls in our class. They had a very good time, and nothing untoward happened until after tea, when they found themselves in the berry garden, a little tired of all their games and ripe for any enticing form of mischief which might present itself. This presently took the form of daring. Daring was the fashionable amusement among the Avonlea small fry just then. It had begun among the boys, but soon spread to the girls, and all the silly things that were done in Avonlea that summer, because the doers therefore were dared to do them, would fill a book by themselves. First of all, Carrie Sloane dared Ruby Gillis to climb to a certain point in the huge old willow tree before the front door, which Ruby Gillis, albeit in mortal dread of the fat green caterpillars with which the tree was infested, and with the fear of her mother before her eyes if she should tear her new muslin dress, nimbly did, to the discomfiture of the aforesaid Carrie Sloane. Then Josie Pye dared Jane Andrews to hop on her left leg around the garden without stopping once or putting her right foot to the ground, which Jane Andrews gamely tried to do but gave out at the third corner and had to confess herself defeated. Josie's triumph being rather more pronounced than good taste permitted, Anne Shirley dared her to walk along the top of the board fence which bounded the garden to the east. Now, to walk board fences requires more skill and steadiness of head and heel than one might suppose who has ever tried it. But Josie Pye, if deficient in some qualities that make for popularity, had at least a natural and inborn gift, duly cultivated for walking board fences. Josie walked the berry fence with an airy unconcern which seemed to imply that a little thing like that wasn't worth a dare. Reluctant admiration greeted her exploit, for most of the other girls could appreciate it, having suffered many things themselves in their efforts to walk fences. Josie descended from her perch flushed with victory and darted a defiant glance at Anne. Anne tossed her red braids. "I don't think it's such a very wonderful thing to walk a little low-board fence," she said. "I knew a girl in Marysville who could walk the ridgepole of a roof." "I don't believe it," said Josie flatly. "I don't believe anyone could walk a ridgepole. You couldn't anyhow." "Couldn't I?" cried Anne rashly. And I think we can all see where this is going. Okay. "Then I dare you to do it," said Josie defiantly. "I dare you to climb up there and walk the ridgepole of Mr. Barry's kitchen roof." Anne turned pale. But there was clearly only one thing to be done. She walked toward the house where a ladder was leaning against the kitchen roof. All the fifth-grade girls said, "Oh," partly in excitement, partly in dismay. "Don't you do it, Anne," entreated Diana. "You'll fall off and be killed. Never mind, Josie Pye, it isn't fair to dare anybody to do anything so dangerous." "I must do it. My honor is at stake," said Anne solemnly. "I shall walk that ridgepole, Diana, or perish in the attempt. If I am killed, you are to have my pearl bead ring." Sorry. She's so solemn. Anne climbed the ladder amid breathless silence, gained the ridgepole, balancing herself uprightly on that precarious footing, and started to walk along it. Dizzily conscious that she was uncomfortably high up in the world, and that walking ridgepoles was not a thing in which your imagination helped you out much. Nevertheless, she managed to take several steps before the catastrophe came. Then she swayed, lost her balance, stumbled, staggered, and fell sliding down over the sun-baked roof and crashing off it through the tangle of Virginia creeper beneath. All before the dismayed circle below could give a simultaneous, terrified shriek. If Anne had tumbled off the roof on the side up which she had ascended, Diana would probably have fallen heir to the pearl bead ring then and there. Fortunately, though, she fell on the other side where the roof extended down over the porch, so nearly to the ground that a fall, therefore, was a much less serious thing. Nevertheless, when Diana and the other girls had rushed frantically around the house, except Ruby Gillis, who remained as if rooted to the ground and went into hysterics, they found Anne lying all white and limp among the wreck and ruin of the Virginia creeper. "Anne, are you killed?" shrieked Diana, throwing herself on her knees beside her friend. "Oh, Anne, dear Anne, speak just one word to me and tell me if you're killed." To the immense relief of all the girls, and especially of Josie Pye, who, in spite of lack of imagination, had been seized with horrible visions of a future branded as the girl who was the cause of Anne Shirley's early and tragic death. Anne sat dizzily up and answered uncertainly, "No, Diana, I am not killed, but I think I am rendered unconscious." "Where?" sobbed Carrie Sloane. "Oh, where, Anne?" Before Anne could answer, Mrs. Barry appeared on the scene. At sight of her, Anne tried to scramble to her feet, but sank back again with a sharp little cry of pain. "What's the matter? Where have you hurt yourself?" demanded Mrs. Barry. "My ankle," gasped Anne. "Oh, Diana, please find your father and ask him to take me home. I know I can never walk there, and I'm sure I couldn't hop so far on one foot when Jane couldn't even hop around the garden." Marilla was out in the orchard picking a panful of summer apples when she saw Mr. Barry coming over the log bridge and up the slope, with Mrs. Barry beside him and a whole procession of little girls trailing after him. In his arms he carried Anne, whose head lay limply against his shoulder. At that moment, Marilla had a revelation. In the sudden stab of fear that pierced her very heart, she realized what Anne had come to mean to her. She would have admitted that she liked Anne, nay, but she was very fond of Anne, but now she knew as she hurried wildly down the slope that Anne was dearer to her than anything else on earth. "Mrs. Barry, what has happened to her?" she gasped, more white and shaken than the self-contained, sensible Marilla had been for many years. Anne herself answered, lifting her head, "Don't be very frightened, Marilla. I was walking the ridgepole and fell off. I expect I have sprained my ankle. But Marilla, I might have broken my neck. Let's look on the bright side of things." Oh, I love Anne. "I might have known you'd go and do something of that sort when I let you go to the party," said Marilla, sharp and shrewish in her very relief. "Bring her in here, Mr. Barry, and lay her on the sofa. Mercy me, the child has gone and fainted." Oh, all right, we'll stop there. Poor Anne. Thank goodness she'll be okay. There are still a few more pages to that chapter, but we'll return to those the next time. But for now, thank you for allowing me to share Anne's story with you. And thank you for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I'm so deeply grateful for you. So you sleep well, my friend. And if you're still awake and would like more company, you can always queue up another episode. There are lots of them in the archive. So we'll talk soon, but for now, sweet dreams. Thank you.